So officially, bonjour and bienvenue. Welcome to this French Book Tour webinar. So French artists in fiction, 4 lives, 4 authors. So thanks for being here with us today. Officially, we had people sign up from 7 countries. That's US, Canada, the UK, Ireland, Italy, and Switzerland. So a nice international group. So I will just very briefly introduce each of our authors today. So we have Paris-born Lilianne Milgrom. She's an award-winning international artist, writer on the arts, and an author. And her 5-star best-selling novel, L'Origine, is the result of 10 years of research, and it was accepted for into the Historical Novel Society. Then you will hear from Linda Lappin, who wrote Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne, and this is her 4th novel. Then our 3rd author is Drema Drudge. She and her husband record a bi-weekly podcast called Writing All the Things, when not traveling. And her 1st novel, Victorine, focuses on a forgotten, accomplished French painter. And our 4th author is Byrd. He just published just a week ago, officially, I believe, his novel, Monet and Oscar. And I'm Emma. I'm the owner of French Book Tours, where for 8 years I've been promoting books related to France. So now I turn the mic to Lilianne.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for organizing this incredible event. I'm delighted to be on a panel with such talented authors. So I thought I would begin by briefly setting the stage for the background against which our novels take place. And it's no wonder that so many books have been written about Paris in the late 19th century and early 20th century, because Paris at that time was a place of social unrest, moral decadence, and scandal. It was a place of political upheaval and cultural transformation. And it was a time of clashes between those that were clinging on to the status quo and those that were agitating for change. If you add to the mix this drove of artists that descended upon Paris, then you have the perfect set of circumstances that would end up yielding some of the most iconic works of art in art history. So all 4 of our books delve into the lives and psyches of 4 giants of the time: Gustave Courbet, Claude Monet, Amedeo Modigliani, and Edouard Manet. Each author has taken a unique approach to letting us into the lives and struggles and loves of these 4 artists and the people that shared their lives. In my case, I am focusing on the extraordinary journey and remarkable story of one particular painting painted by Gustave Courbet, L'Origine du Monde, The Origin of the World, painted in 1866. If you are not familiar with this painting, I guess the best way to describe it is a peep show perspective of a woman's exposed genitals. There's no arms, no head, no legs. It's very realistically rendered, to say the least. And once you see this painting, you won't easily forget it. As an artist, the painting totally bewitched me, not only from the point of view of the way that Courbet is so masterful in handling the paint, but L'Origine du Monde, The Origin of the World, triggers a range of emotions. Like, you look at it and you think, is this pornographic and exploitative, or is it actually the ultimate homage to woman? What sort of man was brave enough to fight tradition and to tackle a subject that had been taboo for centuries? Think about it. Up to that point, that part of a woman's anatomy was shielded by a hand, a fig leaf, or, a strategically placed piece of fabric. So the prologue of my book, L'Origine, The Secret Life of the World's Most Erotic Masterpiece, tells of my true adventures from the moment I spied Courbet's beautiful masterpiece on the wall of the Orsay Museum in Paris, and to the time when I became the first artist authorized by the museum to become the painting's copyist. The novel that follows was inspired by the extraordinary journey, and it's really an odyssey of this museum. The painting was hidden for 150 years, passed from hand to hand across continents. And it was really a tale of survival from French revolutionaries, Turkish pashas, and nefarious Nazi captains. You really couldn't make this stuff up. After completing my time as a copyist, I just really became obsessed with telling the story of this headstrong renegade painter and his 19th century painting that still shocks the world. The book is a culmination of 10 years of research and writing, and as a debut author, I am really honored and validated to have received for the book several awards and medallions to date. The question has been posed about which scene was the hardest scene to write. And I think most authors will say some chapters just write themselves, and others fight you with every word. The scene that was the most difficult for me to write was the scene leading up to the moment when Courbet decides to paint this particular painting, because it's a pivotal moment in the book. And if that doesn't ring true, then the whole book will fall flat. So I had to get inside his head and really walk around in there. And fortunately, I read and reread the 700-page compendium of his personal correspondence. So I got to know Gustave Courbet very well. And being an artist myself, I could sort of imagine the moment when he was conceptualizing the painting. But nonetheless, I wanted to inject into that scene as much fact as I possibly could. And I did rewrite that chapter, several times. I'm pretty happy with it now. The whole experience of birthing L'Origine, the novel, I would say, fluctuated from exhilaration to total demoralization. I asked myself many times why I was so driven to write this book. The years of research, the hour upon hour of writing, not to mention the rewriting, which is just downright laborious. So what I did not foresee was what awaited me after I finished my manuscript. Seasoned authors had warned me that the hard work starts after you finish the book. You start by the soul-destroying search for an agent, or you decide to self-publish. Then there's the angst of the cover design. And after all these huge hurdles, there's all the promotion and the spreading the word on social media, which not all authors, it doesn't come naturally to everybody. Nonetheless, having said that, I don't want to sign off on a negative note, because if you were to ask me, would I do it again? My answer would be yes, definitely yes. So I'm delighted to be here. If you've read my book, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. And if you haven't picked up L'Origine yet, I'd love for you to read it and let me know what you think. Because like I said, I'm obsessed with telling the world about this artist and his magnificent and contentious, controversial painting. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Lilianne. And so, yeah, if you have any question about the book, start writing your question in the chat, please.
L'Origine, the secret life of the world's most erotic masterpiece. Prologue. Paris, winter 2011, the Orsay Museum. It stopped me dead in my tracks. Granted, I was in Paris, but nonetheless, this wasn't something you'd expect to see in one of the most celebrated museums in the world. Prominently displayed on its own dedicated wall and hanging at eye level was a realistically rendered, X-rated peep show perspective of a woman's exposed genitals. Not a fig leaf in sight. The parted thighs drew my eye towards the riotous pubic bush just left of dead center. The vulva was split asunder by a palette knife slash of scarlet. A shadowed ravine divided the buttocks into two creamy rounded orbs, and only a single breast, crested by a blush-colored nipple, peeked out from beneath rumpled sheets. No face, no legs, no arms, just lady bits. I knew that staring was rude, but what could possibly be ruder than what I was staring at? Even sans the strategically angled museum lights and the dusky aubergine backdrop, the painting was riveting. For its modest size, it packed a monumental punch, yet it exuded dignity and reverence, a fitting homage to nature's inspired genius. The tasteless reproductions stamped onto t-shirts and mugs bore little resemblance to the original painting before me. Stifled guffaws reminded me that I wasn't the only voyeur. People were milling about trying not to gape, while others took a good long gawk and scurried off. I felt inexplicably affronted on behalf of the headless, nameless model. By contrast, she seemed unfazed and unabashed. The more I gazed, the less she appeared constrained by the ornately carved and gilded frame that confined her. One could almost hear her sigh as she stretched her invisible arms lazily overhead and settled her naked rump deeper into the white bedclothes. I bent forward to read the caption, L'origine du monde, the origin of the world, 1866, Gustave Courbet.
Now we can listen to Linda.
Well, hello everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and I wanted to thank Emma for organizing this wonderful event. And it was such a pleasure also to work with the other authors and to read their books and to get to know them a bit through email and now finally a little bit in person. My book is Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne, and it's the story of Jeanne, who is Modigliani's companion, muse, common law wife, and the mother of his child. And Jeanne Hébuterne is not very well known as an artist because she was an art student when she met Modigliani, and they lived together in a situation which was half the time at his place and the other half of the time she was with her parents, who didn't know anything about what was going on between the two of them. And when she died, her brother took all of the artworks that Jeanne had produced and locked them away in his studio for 80 years because the family did not approve of the relationship between Jeanne and Modigliani. And it wasn't until the year 2000 when, through many efforts, first by Jeanne's own daughter, the daughter of Modigliani and Jeanne Hébuterne, who tried to convince her uncle and later his heirs to make these works public. It took so many years, and with the help of Christian Perisel, who was an art critic, they finally convinced the family to let these documents be released, which happened finally in the year 2000. So for 80 years, the public had forgotten that Jeanne was an artist. All we knew about her was that she was Modigliani's favorite model. And in fact, he must have painted over 30 portraits of her. So there was the show in Venice in the year 2000. And after that, the art world began to take an interest in Jeanne Hébuterne. And there were catalogs and exhibitions. And the family began to sell off her pieces at auctions. And now her work brings quite formidable sums at auctions at Christie's, whereas before they were just considered sketches by an unknown art student. So it's amazing how her reputation has evolved just since the year 2000, when the artworks were finally made public. So Jeanne Modigliani and Jeanne Hébuterne and Amadeo Modigliani were a legendary couple in Montparnasse because they were so beautiful, they were so young, they were so talented, and they were also so tragic because Modigliani died in his 30s of tubercular meningitis in January 1920 in conditions of extreme poverty when his career was only just beginning to take flight. He was finally becoming known. And Jeanne, unable to face the idea of life without him, fell through a window 48 hours later and died. So it's a very tragic story. But my novel doesn't focus on the tragedy. In fact, the subtitle of the book is The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne, because I want to talk about not only what happened during her life and about her death, but also this evolution in her status from a nobody to an avatar of Montparnasse. And the way I approached this novel was, the novel is a historical novel, but it has elements of fantasy, magical realism, and Gothic. And my idea was to tell the story through Jeanne's ghost, through the perspective of the ghost, so that we can follow the evolution not only during her life, but also after her death, up into our own times, and in fact, up until the year 2021. So the book is constructed with 3 timelines. There are 3 main narrators. It's sort of like a triptych with 3 panels. And the first panel is Jeanne Hébuterne telling her own story through a diary and through her ghostly perspective. Then there's the panel, which is the middle panel, which is a story narrated by an American art history student who comes across Jeanne's diary in Paris and begins a search for her to find her artworks. And then the third panel is a museum curator in the year 2021 who's organizing a show. And there are 3 objects in the story throughout the novel, which are a bracelet belonging to Jeanne, her diary, and a painting. And the plot is based on the disappearance and recovery of these items throughout these long, 80 years, 100 years. And all of this comes together in the last section. But underneath it all, there's another timeline, which is Jeanne's search for Modigliani in the afterlife, in the other world of the other Paris, which is the realm of the dead, set in Paris of the dead, so that Jeanne has to make this journey to be reunited with Modigliani by the end of the book. So it has this structure, which is a magical realism structure with parts which were very, very well researched and other parts which are pure myth and fantasy. And I became interested in Jeanne because I happened to be present at the exhibition in the year 2000 when her works were being shown. And I'd gone there because there was a writer named Beatrice Hastings, who was a mistress and a model for Modigliani. And she was the catalog included some things by Beatrice Hastings. So I went to the show because I was researching Hastings and her relationship with Catherine Mansfield. And instead I discovered Jeanne Hébuterne. The first time in 80 years that these drawings were being exhibited publicly. They were amazing because there were some very bold nude self-portraits. And of course, when Jeanne was studying art, women had been admitted to public art academies only for about a decade, and they had been excluded from drawing nude models at that time. Jeanne's time they could, but it was a new thing for women to be able to draw nude models. And then there were these very charming family portraits, and there were also interiors of the studio and of her home. And there were some very disturbing drawings of Modigliani on his deathbed. So all of these things together made showed a very complex personality. And I just began researching her life. There hardly anything was available at that time. And so the most difficult thing for me in writing this book was the lack of documents regarding Jeanne's life. It took about 20 years of research, not constantly, of course, but since so few things were available, I had to sift through a lot of material, which were memoirs by the people their friends, and a lot of conflicting information came out, and many people were jealous of Jeanne, and considered her a very that she really even wasn't that important to Modigliani, and so you find very dismissive reports in some of the memoirs. And the other difficulty was that I'd started writing this book as a first person narrative, as a diary, and now it does include a diary, but you can't be a witness to your own death and live to report it. So that's why I decided to write from the ghost point of view.
Thank you very much.
Loving Modigliani, a novel by Linda Lappin. The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne, Part 1. The ringing in my ears ceased with the dull thud of a heavy weight hurled out from a high window, crashing into the courtyard. I blacked out as a wave of pain surged through my body, traveling to the tips of my fingers and the roots of my hair. I'd barely had time to glimpse my brother Andre's face at the window, to hear the neighbor's cat yowling on the balcony below us, or the precipitation of feet on the stairs. Then there I was, conscious again, rather bewildered but intact, suspended in the air a few inches above that bloody heap on the cobblestones, a taut, transparent string protruding from my belly seemed to be attaching me to it. While Andre knelt weeping beside the broken thing lying amid the shards of the potted sage plants kept by the concierge for her digestive tisanes, my parents' faces appeared in my bedroom window, ghostly through the organdy curtains. I wanted to reassure them that I wasn't hurt, so I dashed towards the door, but the string at my middle pulled me right back to the courtyard. I wanted to tell them it was all a mistake and to please go back to bed. Despite the terrible row I had just had with Andre about what I should do now that Maudie was dead, I wasn't angry at them anymore. There was no need for them to be so upset, and I was truly sorry for waking everyone up. But the words on my lips produced no sound or effect. Soon enough, my parents withdrew from the window, and my brother went back inside after an agitated consultation with the concierge, who had come shuffling out in her bathrobe. A few moments later, up on the 4th floor, all the windows banged shut.
Now we can listen to Drema.
Yes, thank you, Emma. And again, I want to echo the others in saying, Emma, thank you so much for your hard work in putting this together. We really appreciate it. And the other authors, I'm sensing a real thread here of trying to bring things, to light that haven't been in so long. I think all of us have that in common. For me, my book is Victorine, and it focuses on a model that Monet called his favorite model, Victorine Louise Morant. So I am a lifelong learner. Actually, I should stop and say, I have her with me today. Obviously a copy, and that is a Monet painting. It's called Portrait of Victorine Morant, and I believe that to be the first one he did of her. There's kind of a little dissent as into which he did first, but I believe he painted this, and well, he did paint in 1862, but he also painted some paintings that might be familiar, some of his most scandalous, if you will, Olympia. She posed for that as well, and in it she is a full-on nude. She has her hand covering her genitalia, but she's a full-on nude. There's a black cat at the end of the painting at her feet with an arched back, and then there's a servant woman in the background carrying some flowers. And so, like I said, I'm a lifelong learner. I was in a literature and painting class, or like an art appreciation class. It was called The Painted Word, and our professor was putting up some slides, and he puts up Olympia. And I thought I knew something about art, but somehow I did not know that painting. And it sort of arrested me because it's very large and it's very striking. And I had just written a short story about Olga Meerson, who was actually a model / student of Henri Matisse. And so I was kind of in that frame of mind, I think, but it felt like Victorine just stopped me. She sort of arrested me, and she said, do you want to know more? I have something I want to say. And I was like, okay. And so the professor has moved on, like he's on to another slide, but I'm like furiously writing down the little bit he did say about her. And so I'm someone, when I engage with art, I like to engage with all of my senses. I will do research, but I like to go to the paintings first of all. And So my husband and I went to Paris. We went to the Louvre, and we're standing in front of Olympia. And first of all, that was mind blowing because it was almost a coincidence, that trip. And yet it's been such a journey. I almost feel, I'm not a real woo-woo person, but it felt a little woo-wooey. There was this whole convergence of events. We were supposed to go to Paris. We go to Paris. We're in front of this painting. I still had refused to look up anything about her at this point because I wanted to look at the paintings. I had looked at the paintings. Monet in all did at least 10 paintings of her, called her his favorite model. Besides Olympia, by the way, also Luncheon on the Grass. That's also one that many people know is also a controversial painting of her. And so we're in front of Olympia, and I feel like she still wants to tell me something, but I still don't know what. I'm like, what is it you want to say? And a tour group comes by, and it's a woman speaking English, the person who's leading it. She says something that makes it into the book, but I could never confirm it. I will tell you, could never confirm it. She said, you notice I had been looking at Victorine's nose in the painting, thinking it looked a little bit off to me. I wasn't sure what was going on there. She said, rumor has it that Victorine had a boxer boyfriend who broke her nose. I could never confirm that anywhere else, but it made it into the book because it felt like maybe that was one of the things she wanted to tell me. Well, come to find out, she wasn't just Monet's model. She also was an artist, and that was the thing that she was trying to tell me. And so I started looking into that. And much like Linda's situation, we still don't know a whole lot about her. She was born February 18th, 1844. She died March 17th, 1997, or sorry, 27, at the age of 83. Her artwork at that point. So I read the one half biography, half memoir that existed about her at the time by Eunice Lipton. And that was really sort of Eunice's documenting of her search for her and not really being able to find the historical woman. So I picked up a few tidbits from there, but there really wasn't much to know. And at that point, when it was written in the 90s, none of Victorine's paintings were believed to have survived. So there was nothing. And that broke my heart because, like I said, I like to go to the source. I like to see what an artist is saying. I get really close up and I look at the colors and I look at the brushstrokes. So in 2004, by the time I was actually doing heavily into my research, one of her paintings had been recovered Palm Sunday. I was thrilled. Well, like I said, I was already into it. So I was really excited. Okay, what I really want to see is her self-portrait, but I'll make do. I'll do the best that I can. Well, through deep research and my husband's help, and he's on the call, so thank you so much, we discovered there were more paintings of hers that had been rediscovered, and they were actually in the city where she had last lived, in Cologne, in France. So that was Le Briquet, which is a little boy, and there's a painting of a puppy called Jupe, and not there, but elsewhere. Then I'll just real quickly wrap this up. Her self-portrait had been rediscovered. So for me, I wanted to really delve into how she saw herself, not just how all of these other men, because other men had painted her as well. And so I wanted to be sure to look really deeply at what she saw herself as. And so that really made the whole journey for me.
Thank you very much.
Today, while I am giving a guitar lesson in my father's lithography shop, the gifted yet controversial painter Edouard Monet enters the shop. He gives me the nod. I cover the strings of my guitar with my hand to silence them. Pierre has mentioned Monet's recent patronage of his shop, of course, but I have never been here when the artist has come by. Monsieur Monet, this is my daughter Victorine. I believe We've met, I say. And where is it we have met, mademoiselle, he asks, wincing as he looks in the vicinity of my nose. Is this a snub? I run my hand over the swollen, crooked lump of flesh on my face. I must be mistaken. I turn away, smiling bitterly at my quick temper, at my trying to turn up a nose such as this. Of course he doesn't recognize me. I motion for my student to put her guitar away. That's enough for today, dear. Though she looks at the clock with a puzzled brow, she does as I say. My father graciously allows me to give lessons in his shop, claiming he loves to hear young musicians learn to play, though I suspect it's more because my mother hates allowing anyone into our house besides her regular millinery clients. Monet moves toward me, puts his face close to mine. I don't pull away, but only because that is the way painters see. I would have punched another man for standing so close. He snaps his fingers. "La crevette," he exclaims, backs away. Monet grasps my hand with frank friendliness that I almost want to believe. "It is you. I've seen you model coutures. But what has happened to your nose?" I rise on my toes, though the height it gives me is minimal. I motion for Gabrielle to gather her music, and she shuffles the sheets. I move closer to him while withdrawing my hand from his, take out my emerald green enamel cigarette case, a gift from a wealthy student at Couture's studio, and light a cigarette. I empty my lungs straight at the yellowed ceiling, though my torso is not a foot from his. My father frowns and waves the smoke away. How many times must I tell him that I am 18 and I will smoke if I please? He smokes a pipe sometimes. What's the difference? I give guitar lessons now. Obviously, I'm no longer a model. Monet's eyes graze on me. I stand straighter. When I realize it, I relax. I know just how I'll paint you. Shall we say tomorrow at 1? My father runs his grungy shopcloth through his hands. I raise my chin, art lust in my eyes. We shall say 2.
We're going from Manet's world to Monet's world.
Thank you, Emma, for putting this together. You know, we talked over a month ago about this idea, and then you brought it to life, and it's just fantastic that we are.
Actually, the idea did come originally from Joe. He's the first of all my clients to ask for a type of event. So thank you for launching.
Yeah, well, it's great. I mean, it's really a nice opportunity. You know, I wanted to say that I first learned about Monet when I was in college. I was in an art appreciation class with 300 students, and there was so many painters to look at, and I settled on Monet as my favorite. And I chose at that point to focus on one artist because I knew I couldn't possibly keep track of all these artists in my life, and I wanted to have one artist that I understood and appreciated, and I wanted to learn more about him. So that kind of began a 30-year plus relationship on trying to understand who he is and what he did, and what his whole life experiences were like. It's a very interesting person. So anyway, I had always planned on writing a book about Monet, but then never really had a chance because, you know, life takes over. You have to earn a living and children and stuff like that. So the pandemic came along and I had time. So rather than dwelling on the life in the pandemic and the whole shutdown aspect of life, I decided I would create my own world in Giverny, France, and I would live there at least part of the time. So I spent probably about a year and a half doing this. I started a little before the pandemic and finished last fall, but it was really a wonderful experience to go through all this stuff. The first time I visited Monet's home in Giverny, I don't know if you've been there or not, but the thing that struck me the most was when I walked in the dining room, which is all chrome yellow and with blue accents, and even the chairs are chrome. There on the wall were all these strange drawings, prints, and I had no idea what they were. I had not seen them before, and I wanted to learn more about them. So suddenly my journey took on another phase. You know, my research had to include those as well. So I got back to California, and so happens that the Young Museum had an exhibit of Hiroshige, the Japanese artist who was one of the primary artists that Monet collected in Hokusai. And I went to that exhibit and learned more and bought books and read more and more and more. So my focus then became bringing the East and West together, and why in the world were the Impressionists affected by the Japanese prints. So that took a whole long journey in itself to figure out what that was all about. The I got into the Japanese woodblock prints a bit in the book. I wasn't able to do as much as I wanted to with them because there's so much more to talk about. I had originally thought about maybe doing sort of a parallel book of Monet's life as an artist and Rochier's life as an artist, because there were a lot of similarities and parallels, but I wasn't able to really get that much into the book. So I decided what I would do was focus on Monet. And my first thought had always been to do like a biography of Monet, but there's been so many of those done, and they're done so well that I really didn't want to go into that aspect. So what I did was I found a company in South Africa that has supports writers, and I got a writing coach who lives in Crete, but she had spent time studying in France at Sorbonne. So I hired her as my writing coach, and I started writing, and not really understanding where I was going exactly with the book. I wanted to bring in another character to really talk about Monet's personal life, the side of him that wasn't really in books, it wasn't published. Because mostly books will talk about his art and talk about some of his highlights, his features, his characteristics, some of his activities, where he painted, what he did, but not really the personality behind it. And I felt I had to have somebody that went in, had a reason to learn more about his personal life and who he was as a person. So that's when Oscar came into the picture. And so Oscar came in, and the first thing he did was go into Monet's dining room to talk to Monet, and there in the dining room were all these prints that he couldn't understand, and like I couldn't. So he found out that Monet wouldn't tell him much about them, but he sent them to somebody in Paris who did. And somebody in Paris who did was a Japanese art collector at a store called Bing's. And Bing's was a very popular place at that time for the whole Japanese art movement. So he goes to Paris, he learns about the Japanese art to some extent. He goes on a train on the way back, and in the middle of this train ride on the way back, this person comes and sits down beside him. Now, the person was a beautiful girl named Isabel, and she wasn't really supposed to be in the book. I mean, that was not a character that I really had planned on. I hadn't planned on him having a romantic interest. Of course, I hadn't planned on much of the book at all anyway. But anyway, she came along, and I couldn't get rid of her. My writing coach said, "You got to do more with her," and so she insisted that I had to write more about her. But I also had to write about her clothing and about her habits and her behaviors, because as I knew, women would be the largest group of people reading about my book, about reading my book about the topic. So I needed to have women involved, and if women involved, I had to understand clothing, and I'm not a clothing person. And I'm not really a person who understands a lot about the whole feminine psyche anyway, but given that, I decided I better learn. So I tried to learn and tried to relate in the book as much as I could about that. But she became a very fascinating character, but she was the most difficult character for me to write. And luckily, she was there because she brought out the human side of of Oscar, who had been injured in the war, and he was wounded, and he had been in a long time in a hospital, and he had what we call today PSD. Then it was called or PTSD. Then it was called shell shock. But he was really a emotionally destroyed human being, and his mother died at the same time. He wasn't there to be with her when she died. So Isabel took the place of all that comforting and loving and that contact that he needed. And so throughout the book, Monet keeps introducing Oscar to characters within his life. And these introductions were actually factual. The people were real, the places were real, the events were real, the conversations were not, of course, because those conversations were not recorded, but it gave a much broader and more detailed view of who Monet was a person and how he interacted with his friends and his family. So I was able to use this foil, this Oscar, as a person to really understand and grasp who Monet was and what he was doing. And I think that was really the most fun part, was really meeting all these characters and I took the time to go to Clemenceau's house in Paris and learn more about him, because he was a prominent character. And then I used him as a character because he traveled a lot to the US, and used him as a character to meet Oscar's mother and bring that whole scene into the situation. But anyway, it was quite a fun project to go in. And I said it was a place to escape to. I always read to escape and read to learn something. Well, this time I was writing to learn something and writing to escape. So it was really a fun journey. And I think it was something that, for me, it was the joy of the process. And that's why I not interested in, selling the book or making money off the book, but I'm interested in people reading and enjoying it. So for the next 5 days, Amazon will have the Kindle version of the book online free from today through Wednesday. So you can just go online, sign up, and get it. And if you get it and you read it and you like it or you don't like it, whatever you say, please leave a comment, because comments are what's important to all of us who write books. And I'd like to hear more about your opinions of what you liked about it. But anyway, that's the story of Monet. And Monet crosses the paths of all the other writers that are in this group of 4. They all touch each other in certain ways. And Olympia, I'll just mention very briefly, Olympia was in the museum for Drema to see, because Monet raised the money to force the state to buy the painting to put into the museum. And he did it to support the widow of Monet, and also did it to highlight the importance of Impressionism and to sell art for all the other artists and Impressionists. And he was the one who spearheaded that movement and started that whole process. So there's a connection that maybe I didn't know about. Thank you.
Oscar Bonham's palms sweated as he crept from the warm kitchen filled with the spice-laden aroma of frying sausage mixed with the smell of aromatic dark coffee into Monet's yellow dining room. He used what little money he had to purchase new work clothes for his first day on the job. He twisted his still, stiff brown woolen cap between his sweating fingers as he glanced at his reflection in the picture glass to see if his pale skin betrayed his months in the military hospital. Did his slight frame and frail stature look well enough for rigorous gardening work? No one would believe he was once tanned, muscular, and robust. Did his prematurely graying hair and the red circles around his eyes reveal the trials he had endured at the front? Although 34, he felt and looked much older. Oscar summoned his courage pulled from somewhere deep inside himself, as he had done when climbing out of the trenches and facing the enemy. Bonjour, Monsieur Monet. No movement. The newspaper Monet held did not lower. The first salvo had fallen short. He fired off another. Bonjour, Monsieur Monet. Still no response. Second salvo, off target. Perhaps Monet was hard of hearing. Oscar added more powder and fired the third shot as he shouted, Bonjour, Monsieur Monet. The paper lowered to reveal piercing black eyes and a long white beard stained yellow with nicotine. Monet resembled the newspaper photos Oscar had seen of him, short, stocky, and with an intense gaze that seemed to miss nothing around him. His hands, with translucent skin and heavily veined, looked muscular and tanned, as befitted a painter who worked mostly outdoors. Monet stared at Oscar as if trying to remember who was this invader of his dining room and disturber of his early morning coffee. He wore an English herringbone wool suit buttoned at the neck, with just an inch of white ruffled shirt cuffs showing at the sleeves. At last he spoke. "Who are you?" He sounded irritated. Oscar drew in his breath and squared his shoulders to make himself look the part before responding with, "I'm your new gardener, monsieur." Monet frowned. "I don't remember you. Who hired you? Why should I hire a gardener in the middle of the winter?" Oscar stammered as he gathered enough breath to reply, You did, monsieur, yesterday. At least that's what I was told." He gripped his newspaper tighter, shook his head and frowned. "So, what are you doing in here? This isn't the garden." "Madame Blanche asked me to meet you here before dawn to carry your paintings for you." And with that, Monet raised the paper again, which left Oscar standing in the doorway, not knowing whether to stay or go. Oscar stood twisting and untwisting his cap and wondering, will he dismiss me, fall asleep, or will we start our day together? Could this cranky old man be his father? Probably not, but he might know him. Since it was his first day on this new job, he remained to see what would happen next. After 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes with no response, he looked around the room. Yellow was the theme color. Even the chairs and light fixtures were Provence yellow, as his mother called it. Monet seemed obsessed with the color yellow, and eating, by the looks of the dining room with its multiple sets of dishes and an abundance of silverware. The odd prints that hung on the walls disturbed him. They were most unusual and not yellow. He saw dozens of them depicting an assortment of Japanese people in native costumes through scenes of Japan. They reminded him of photos his Japanese friends in San Francisco had shown him. The prints featured plants and animals that he didn't recognize. Oscar scratched his head and thought, why would one of the world's most famous Impressionist painters have these Japanese prints on his walls instead of his art or that of his colleagues? Lying in the hospital, he had dreamed of what he would do when he was released. He never imagined he would work in one of the most famous gardens in France. This job was the start of his new life. He was excited and frightened to be here. Curiosity was getting the better of him as he walked around the long table, examining the prints. Each one seemed more colorful and stranger than the one before, and someone had labeled every one with the artist's name. He made a note to ask Monsieur Monet about the prints. They must have been significant to him if they were hanging in his dining room. Undoubtedly, he would have dictated the decoration of this space, the essential room for entertaining. Finally, Monet's hand emerged to crush out his cigarette in his overflowing ashtray. He lowered his paper, rose from his chair, and shuffled to the door. Are you coming? He threw over his shoulder. Caught off guard, while still staring at the prints, Oscar felt he was a puppy following its master, and hurried through the door after him, down the steps to the garden, past the cart, and into the darkened studio. Put these in the cart and follow me.
Thank you very much. So please, participants, if you have questions to ask our authors. Now we're going to refocus a bit on Lilianne's book. So the other authors first, if you have questions to ask her. And then, yeah, anyone, please, I see a question for Joe. We'll come to that later. Anyone who has a question for Lilianne, please type it in. What about our other authors? What did you, any question to Lilianne?
Lilianne, I was wondering, if you had not copied Courbet's painting, do you think your book would have been the same, or did that lend something to the writing of it?
First of all, thank you for your question. I don't think I would have written the book because, you know, after you fixate on a painting, and what I noted in your talk was how you want to almost like have this all sense understanding of a painting. So I've never done a copy of a painting in a situation like that in a museum. And so obviously I became fixated with it. And then I became fixated with the artist behind it. And also, like, it gave me such an understanding of it. But as far as like the structure of the book, I really do believe that the prologue, which tells of my sort of exploits with this wonderful painting, that is what I've heard from so many readers that have pulled them in to want to know more about the painting. Because who would want to know about a 19th century painting? And hopefully what I was hoping, and it seems like it was the right choice, was to introduce my personal adventures with the painting. And that led into people saying, I want to know more. And then it goes into the rest of the novel. So thanks for that question.
Lilianne, we have a question. So how did you balance becoming a writer with your regular daily life?
That's really interesting. I mean, my art studio practice did suffer. I mean, I don't know if suffer is the right word, but being a professional artist all my life, and I just got so obsessed and went down all these rabbit holes with the research that I could not get into the studio for, you know, a long, long time. I would dabble, but it wasn't like I was pursuing exhibitions or things like that. It really took the place of what I was doing. It was like a life-changing experience. And but I was painting with words.
Nice way to put it. Yeah. Any other question to Lilianne? Linda, please.
Question for Lilianne. I read quite recently an article in The Guardian that was saying that they believed they had found the other parts of the painting. Did you see that article? And I wondered what you thought about it.
Yes. Well, first of all, because I knew so much about the painting, and I'm shaking my head and I'm saying, this is going to come out as a fraudulent thing. I mean, they should, before making the announcement and writing all these articles about it, everyone got all excited. It was so clear to me that this was, you know, not the head of that particular painting, because people had seen that painting of Gustave Courbet's in a very, very small, intimate setting, which I write about in the book, right after he painted it. There was no head. And then, of course, you got all the experts and all the art historians to weigh in, and they put that to rest. But it would have been a very different painting if it had had the head and all the rest of it. That was not Courbet's
idea, perspective, yeah.
Perspective or idea.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was an interesting thing. It's like, whoa, you know, the head.
You did, in which you put your arm and your head and your leg. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yes, the only time I exhibited my copy of L'Origine du Monde was in New York. I did an installation in which I photographed different parts of my own body and then used my copy also to sort of do this mosaic of a body, and I called it L'Origine c'est moi, I am the origin, because as I was painting at the Musée d'Orsay, the painting and I just became one and the same. I totally identified with the painting. She became me, I became her. It was this very intimate experience, to say the least. Thanks, Linda.
One last, Lilianne, you described a special time in France that each of the books is written about. Do you see a similar period in French art and history since then? I don't know, it's a tough kind of...
That's a tough question, but you know, on the tail end of that, and of course it's Monet and Monet. So surprisingly, I found out that Monet and Monet had been influenced by Gustave Courbet. But after that, I wouldn't say, I mean, of course there were periods of art, but what I want to say about this particularly rich period, it just was all, like I said, all these things converged. And it was like the old and the new and the agitation and the upheaval and the progress that was going on. I think that we haven't seen a period like that.
Yeah, definitely. I have actually one little remark that really struck me when I listened to you all, most of you actually. It's, you know, the question was, why did you choose this artist? And I realized actually you didn't choose the artist chose you. I mean, it's just like, wow, it was so striking when I was listening to you. It's just like,
yes, I thought the same thing when I was listening to the others. Absolutely, it just falls in your lap. Yeah,
completely. Yeah, very, very interesting. So Linda, do we have any question for Linda from our other authors or from our participants?
well, Linda, I have a question. Like, first of all, I want to congratulate you on getting me interested in my first magical realism novel. I thought, no, that's not for me. And I read your book, and you really, at least for me, pulled it off. It was incredible. And it was the right way to do it because, as you say, you wanted to talk about Jeanne, you know, beyond the tragic circumstances. And so I wanted to know how hard it was for you to give up the beginning of your book that you started off in diary form. Now, were you very married to that, or was it?
Well, I ran into a brick wall because towards the end of his life, and Modigliani, when his health was deteriorated, also his psychological state deteriorated. So they were under a lot of stress and strain. So describing that phase of their life would have been extremely depressing, and I think would have falsified a lot of the joy that they must have experienced together, the joy in being together and making art and making love and all that. It would have been overshadowed by both the tragedy and just the strain and stress of his illness and the poverty and all that. And I didn't want to write a gloomy book. I mean, I wanted there to be a kind of a redemption somewhere and a joy. I could only do that if they could meet again in another dimension as artists, with their work being discovered, with her work being discovered and placed alongside that of Modigliani, and also finding each other as spirits. That was very important to me. So it wasn't hard. It was sort of hard to give up because I have never written anything that's so obviously unreal and impossible. There is a kind of a dream element in another novel, but it's open to interpretation as to whether it's real or whether it was more of a hallucination. But in this case, no. I mean,
no. Yeah.
No. Yes.
I was going to say, I feel the same way. It's getting me involved with the ghost story was like, I mean, how can I possibly go there? But what happened was I did, and I really enjoyed it. It was, and looking back at it now, I can see that it would be very difficult to write it any other way. But it was such a challenge for her to write that way and to keep switching writing genres and points of view. It's just incredible. I mean, it was really well done and very complex, and it was great to see that complexity echoed in writing that really she pulled it off. I mean, it was masterful. Thank you.
Yeah, Linda, I thought it's amazing, an amazing feat to be able to manage different genres at the same time. And I'm wondering, did you have any author that inspired to use that type of mix of genres?
No, perhaps a little bit. John Fowles, the author of the Magus, he often had kind of unusual mixes of things. Perhaps that, but nothing really comes to mind as an immediate model. I had these different pieces that I had to put together, and I didn't know how to do it. And then when I wrote the prologue with Jeanne describing her fall from the window, that's when I realized how the pieces would have to fit together.
So she's the one again who told you how to do it, basically.
Yes. Well, I mean, I saw a picture of her looking very vampire-ish, and I thought,
oh, interesting.
What if I change, what if I start writing about Jeanne as a ghost? And that's when it all came together. So yes,
Fascinating.
spoke to me from a photo, I guess you could say.
What about Drema's book? Any question from our authors first?
No, I think it's really interesting to take the view of an artist from the view of the model, because so often the models are forgotten and not really considered, and the artist controls how the model looks and works and acts, and the model is more or less an inanimate object, and she's taken that typical viewpoint and then turned it into something much more rich and enjoyable, where the model also becomes an artist, but is a much more full life figure than just the artist. In fact, the model outshone the artist in terms of the life experience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. Yes, there's certainly, the element of wanting to dissolve the male gaze, if you will, because, she had been painted by all of these different, and especially Monet, male painters. And that's why I wanted to show it from her point of view. I actually did get permission to paint her self-portrait, to add her self-portrait to the back of my book. And I'll try to get it as close as I can, but that it was a stop the press moment, literally, to be able to include that, and that absolutely just capped the book for me. Yeah.
I have a question about the end of Victorine's life.
Yes.
I was fascinated to read about a bonfire that after she died of her possessions being burned, and I wondered if the paintings were in that, or how she was seen by the community around her. That was very interesting to me.
Well, you notice I didn't go that late in the novel. I felt like once she started embracing her life as an artist and headed in that direction and got out from under Monet's influence, that's what I had to say. But that is a rumor. Like I said, we don't know lots of facts about her, but that is one of the rumors, that all of her possessions at the end of her life, and after the woman that she lived with for 40 years, Marie, died, that all of their things were just put on a bonfire. And I do have to wonder if maybe some of her paintings, we all know the terrible story of how one of Van Gogh's paintings ended up in a chicken coop patching a hole, right? So I do have to wonder, but I don't really want to think about it very hard.
We have a question. In the process of writing about Victorine, did you feel you started to understand what she was trying to tell you? Put another way, how did it feel to give a voice to an artist who was essentially rendered invisible, perhaps because of her gender?
Yes, I think definitely her gender, I think her social status, I think those are two of the things that tried to render her as well, just as an object. And that's not to say models aren't very important. Obviously, we do need models in art, but she was also an artist. And I think she was very much trying to say to me, will you please remind the world that I was also an artist? And then being able to bring these painting of hers back, so that people will know a little bit more about her and her art. I've done my best, and I hope she's happy.
Any question for Jo now?
Well, I have a question for Jo. I'm wondering if after working with a coach and writing something about an artist you've been so interested in all your life, did you get the writing bug? Do you feel like writing another book?
Yeah, actually, I have. It's part of a series. I have another one, second book in mind already. I started doing research on that quite a while ago, and then presently I'm undergoing cataract surgery so I can understand how Monet felt when he faced cataract surgery. So,
wow.
Extensive research, but yeah, I have actually in mind to do that, and then I want to do maybe a prequel, something to the beginning of the whole thing, and that requires more of a biography type writing. So it will be fiction, but it will be more difficult because it delves into his younger life and his life coming into art, and that's going to be more difficult and challenging. But the next one will be The Dying of the Light, and it will talk about his last days and his cataract surgery and all of the things that went on between that and the creating of the museum Lingerie in Paris, and how that whole thing evolved. There's some very interesting stories around that. So that's next.
Ooh, fascinating.
Dave Taggart had an interesting question. And I'm pointing out Dave because he and I've been friends for probably since I became interested in researching Monet. We worked together at McGraw-Hill as editors, and his question revolves about the characters and how I was the challenges of trying to get real characters in real situations, and that wasn't quite easy, but basically you get hints about them, about the other characters in Monet's life from various snippets in various books and various components of various books. So it's just kind of piecing all those puzzle pieces together and coming up with situations and timing. Monet had a lot of very close friends. He wasn't a very necessarily an easy outgoing person, but the friends he had, he was very close with, and they were involved in his life quite a bit. So it was difficult, but it was able to piece those together from various components, various pieces from various books. There's a lot of very interesting books about Monet. I mean, if you're really interested in Monet, there's, I don't know if you can see it on the far side of the screen, sort of over that way in my point. There's 4 volumes of the Raison d'Etre, which is his life and all his paintings. And it's not an easy to find collection, but that has a lot of what he said and did. And then there's a lot of quotes from him in various places. The quote I was going to read you was, "The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding." And I think that's probably the biggest contribution that each of our books makes, is a greater understanding of art and artists and how they live and their personalities, because they have fascinating personalities. So I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No problem. Why really the choice of Oscar? Okay, sorry, I don't know much about Monet's life. Is he, well, you say he was not very outgoing, but is he famous as a womanizer? Did he have a lot of affairs, a lot of...
He had several affairs. One was with his first wife before she became his wife. She was a model, one of his models, and just sort of
sounds like your leitmotif here, right?
Yeah, there you go. I think that's pretty much practiced by everybody who was in the art world at that time. Anyway, she was a model, and she got pregnant, and he was going to marry her, but his father and his aunt wouldn't let him. So for a couple of years, they weren't married. There was a war with Germany in 1870, and he fled to England to paint and to live because he'd been in a previous war and his eyes were just pretty much destroyed for a while. So he didn't want to go to war again, and he left his wife and new baby and went to England, and she probably nearly starved. I mean, she was like, he didn't support her, and she just had this child. And anyway, he came back and married her despite what his father and his aunt said. They stopped money coming in, so he didn't have any money to really support her, and he was kind of, living from hand to mouth and begging money from all his friends and whoever else he could. And he, at the same time, ran across a very wealthy woman whose husband had gambled and lost all their money. And so when her husband lost their house and she was homeless, he brought her in with her 6 children into his house. And then by that time, he had a second child. So it was 8 children and 2 wives, basically, a wife and a lover. And he may have been the father of one of her children. But anyway, they were, they were French artists.
Hence the possibility of Oscar. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
We have one last question. Maybe I'm going to ask Linda, and if we have time, all of you. But so Karen said, hearing the authors talk about the years of research that went into their books, it made her wonder how they judge when the research had to stop and the writing begin. I know it's always the big question, right, for any author. So Linda, how did you manage that?
And right after I saw the exhibition in the year 2000, I did some research. It took a couple of years, and I wrote an essay which was published in the year 2002, which got a lot of good feedback. And so that was the germ, the seed of the project to get started. And at a certain point, though, I guess I'd read so much and I'd already fashioned in my mind the feeling for the characters and who they were and what they were like. And at that point, I didn't do any further research. No, it all just came together at one point, because if you keep going on and on and on, there'll be all sorts of other things that you might have to add that you have to say no at a certain point, because you can't rewrite it at the last minute.
And as an artist, I'm not an author, but I do some painting, and I'm sure as a writer it's exactly the same. It's always nicer, better in your head, and at one point you have to stop the writing and rewriting. So okay, that's it. Otherwise, yeah, you can spend your whole life writing on one manuscript, right?
Yes,
So but it's hard to let go at one point and say, okay, it is as it is, right?
It wants to be born with all its defects, but it wants to be born.
Interesting. Oh, that's a nice image.
I just want to say one thing about that also, because I love to research. So even, at some point you have to say, okay, I've researched enough, but it's always calling you, because there's always one more snippet that you hadn't discovered before, and it's also fascinating,
Joe, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever really over. I mean, if you have a burning interest in a topic, you're always going to be susceptible to learning more about it. And when you're writing, I think at least I had to spend a lot of time in the process of writing, checking facts and going back and forth with things and verifying other pieces of information. So it wasn't research per se, it was more, fact checking or verification of what I was doing. So I don't think it's ever really over. I mean, I'm still reading books about Monet, and I found a new one that I haven't read before, so I'm going after that. But it's part of the writing process, and you can't necessarily ever get away from it.
Yep. And Drema?
Same thing. I was very fortunate in that I was in an MFA program, and I had an opportunity to work with a really great author if I had my draft done in 8 months. So I had a clock. So it was a rough draft. It was rough, but it was finished. So otherwise, I'd probably still be working on it today. So.
Now, Joe said that, it's never finished. We heard he's planning a series. Any of you, are you planning to write more books about this painter or another author, another artist, or what's your next step in your writing life?
Well, I'll take that question. I believe that Gustave Courbet deserves his own novel, because even though he is part of my novel about the painting, he is such an amazing character, but I'm not going there yet. But I am I have been accepted to an artist residency in France later this summer at Château Orquevaux.
Wow, congratulations.
And my application rested upon writing a children's novel that has been in my head for over 2 years. So let's see how that goes.
Wow, wow, wonderful. Linda or Drema?
Well, I have a project that was my very, very first novel that has never been published. That's kind of based on The Tempest, because it's the story of a young girl cast away on an island in the Gulf of Gaeta in this late 1700s, and it has to do also with the building of a prison that was made, and gets caught up in the prison and gets put in prison because she happens to be on the island, and then how she is released. So
wow,
historical novel.
Fascinating.
In Neapolitan culture, and so I want to move
Wonderful.
forward.
And Drema, any?
Yes. And while I do intend to write about art more in the future, I don't think I'll ever quit writing about art. My second novel, which will be coming out in the fall, another one of my obsessions is Virginia Woolf. So I wanted to put two very, very different things together. So my book is called Briscoe Chambers' Southern Fried Wolf. It's a novel. Country music in Virginia Woolf. So
wow,
very different things. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe it's time to quit. But I think thank you very much. We had, I think, wonderful exchange, and thanks for the questions from our participants. I would just say au revoir and maybe see you next time.
A bientôt.
One of my students, she's so glad I shared this event with her. Thank you so much for an interesting morning. Truly enjoy listening to all four authors. Thank you, and merci.
Merci
Merci.
beaucoup.
Okay, au
Merci.
revoir.
Au revoir.
Oh, arrivederci.
Ciao.